At my graduation party, my brother raised his plastic cup high and declared, "Let's toast to the family black sheep who somehow got a degree." Some laughed, others looked concerned. My mom smiled and said, "He's just joking." I smiled too and said nothing. 3 days later, I pulled my funding from his business startup and froze the shared loan account. The backyard looked like something out of a magazine spread that evening. White folding chairs arranged in perfect rows beneath strings of twinkling lights, tables draped in crisp blue cloth, the smell of roasted chicken and homemade mac and cheese drifting through the warm summer air. My mom had outdone herself for my graduation party, and for the first time in years, I felt like all the grinding, all the late nights, all the sacrifices had been worth it. At 22, I'd just finished my degree while simultaneously building a small but profitable business. It wasn't luck or natural talent. It was the result of countless nights when I chose textbooks over parties, spreadsheets over sleep, discipline over instant gratification. The gathering that night reflected that success. Relatives I hadn't seen in years, college friends, neighbors, even my old high school basketball coach had come to shake my hand and offer congratulations. I was riding high on that rare feeling of genuine accomplishment when my brother Alex drifted toward the microphone. Alex had that loose, confident walk he always used when he was about to become the center of attention. At 29, he possessed a kind of natural charisma that could fill a room, but he never learned to pair it with follow-through. I thought maybe he'd share a childhood story, offer some brotherly congratulations, or at least acknowledge the moment for what it was. Instead, he raised his plastic cup high and declared to the entire gathering, "Let's toast to the family black sheep who somehow got a degree." The backyard split into two reactions. Half the crowd laughed, thinking it was typical sibling banter, while the other half fell into that uncomfortable silence that comes when a joke lands wrong. Some guests looked at me with those knowing smirks that suggested they thought there might be truth behind his words. My mother, standing near the grill with a forced smile, quickly chimed in that he was just joking. I smiled too, because that's what you do at your own party when your older brother decides to publicly diminish your achievements. But inside, I was calculating the true cost of that moment. The reality behind Alex's performance was this. He had no degree, had never held a job for longer than 8 months, and spent most of his time talking about making it big while borrowing money to cover basic expenses. For the past year, I'd been quietly funding his latest venture, a startup he swore was going to revolutionize something or other. I'd even agreed to a shared business loan account because, despite everything, I wanted to believe this time might be different. I'd been overlooking a lot lately. The missed deadlines, the casual way he treated money that wasn't entirely his, the fact that his work ethic seemed inversely proportional to his confidence level. But this, humiliating me in front of everyone who mattered to me, felt like a line crossed. I didn't confront him that night. I cut the cake, thanked everyone for coming, shook hands, and played the role of the gracious host. But when the last guest left and I was alone in my apartment, staring at the half-burnt string lights scattered across my own backyard, I made a decision that would change everything. 3 days later, I called the bank. Within minutes, our shared account was frozen. I followed that with an email to the small development team we'd hired for his startup, informing them that my funding was complete and my involvement was officially over. I didn't explain myself to Alex. I didn't offer warnings or ultimatums or chances to apologize. The next morning at 8:12 a.m., he woke up to discover his accounts were suddenly lighter, his project was stalled, and the bank was unwilling to move forward until internal disagreements between account holders were resolved. That was just the first domino. My phone started buzzing immediately. Alex called at 8:12, 8:14, and 8:17, each time letting it ring until voicemail picked up. By 8:20, my inbox was glowing with increasingly frantic messages. The first voicemail was sharp and confused. He wanted to know why the account was frozen, why the development team had called to say all work was paused, why his startup's website had gone offline. "You're making this way harder than it needs to be," he said, as if I were the one creating unnecessary complications. I didn't respond. For once, I wanted him to sit in the uncertainty, to actually feel consequences without me stepping in to smooth everything over. At 9:30, my mom called. That alone told me Alex had already run to her, which told me everything I needed to know about his problem-solving skills. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Alex was upset. I should at least talk to him. I needed to sort this out. She said he was counting on this for his future, that pulling out now would destroy months of work. I told her the truth. I wasn't financing someone who thought publicly humiliating me was good comedy. She tried the familiar refrains. He was joking. Don't take it so seriously. You know how your brother is. When I didn't budge, her tone shifted to something sharper. She told me I was punishing the whole family, that my decision wasn't just hurting Alex. That sentence stuck with me because of what it revealed. She didn't say Alex was wrong. She didn't suggest he owed me an apology. All she cared about was that I wasn't playing the role I was supposed to play, the younger brother who props up the older one, regardless of how little he deserves it. By noon, I'd decided to take the next step. Alex and his wife lived in a 2-bedroom condo on the edge of the city. Technically, it was in his name, but the mortgage payments had been coming from my account for the past 14 months. It had started as a short-term arrangement, while they got the startup off the ground. Given how things were progressing, there was no point in maintaining that fiction any longer. I drove over without calling ahead. When Alex opened the door, he looked like he hadn't slept, hair disheveled, shirt wrinkled, that faint smell of stale coffee clinging to him like desperation. Inside, his wife sat surrounded by papers and laptops, clearly in damage control mode. I didn't sit down. Starting next month, the mortgage is on you, I said. No more payments from me. The arrangement is over. For a moment, he just stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. Then came the cascade of excuses. It was all just a joke. I was overreacting. I should have known he didn't mean anything by it. He said I was being petty, throwing away years of brotherhood over a few words. I told him we weren't partners anymore, not in business, not in financial arrangements, not in anything. He could run his startup however he wanted, but he'd be doing it with his own resources. Whether that meant cutting back, taking a real job, or shutting down entirely wasn't my concern anymore. He tried one last angle, claiming I was abandoning family, that I wasn't thinking about what really mattered. I didn't even dignify that with a response. I walked out, got in my car, and drove away. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying his weight on my back, and the relief was almost physical. But if I thought that was the end of it, I was seriously underestimating my family's capacity for escalation. The following week, my parents called with an invitation to a family dinner. They made it sound casual, but the way my mother insisted I absolutely needed to be there told me this was an ambush. I debated skipping it entirely. I already knew the script. They'd downplay what Alex had done, call me overly sensitive, and pressure me to unfreeze the account and resume mortgage payments. But part of me was curious to see how they'd handle the situation now that the comfortable family dynamics had been disrupted. When I arrived, the dining room was set like a staged production. Mom had gone all out, roast chicken, mashed potatoes drowning in gravy, her legendary garlic bread that could be smelled from the street. The lights were unusually bright, casting everything in sharp relief. Dad sat at the head of the table looking uncharacteristically serious. Alex and his wife were already seated, speaking in low, urgent tones that stopped abruptly when they saw me. For the first 20 minutes, we maintained surface-level conversation. Mom asked about my business before quickly changing the subject. Dad mentioned a leak in the garage. Alex made half-hearted jokes about traffic. But I could feel the tension building like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Finally, Mom set down her fork with deliberate precision. Families shouldn't let small misunderstandings turn into big problems, she said, her eyes locked on mine. She continued with familiar platitudes about life being too short for grudges and how everyone makes mistakes when they're trying to be funny. Before I could decide how to respond, Dad set down his own fork with a sharp clink. He turned to Alex and said, "You should have thought before you opened your mouth at that party. You embarrassed your brother in front of everyone, and you're lucky all he did was pull his money." The room went silent. Alex stared at Dad like he'd misheard. Mom's eyebrows shot up in surprise. His wife suddenly became very interested in her plate. Alex tried to recover, leaning back with forced casualness. "It was just a joke. He's taking it too seriously. He knows I didn't mean anything by it." Dad didn't let him finish. "Hiding behind 'just kidding' is the oldest trick in the book. If you respected him at all, you would have apologized right after it happened, not waited until he cut you off financially." His voice was calm, but there was a weight to it that made clear this wasn't a debate. That's when Mom jumped in, leaning toward Dad with disbelief. "That's just how brothers are. He knows Alex was joking. He's the one making a mountain out of nothing." She turned to me, her voice rising. You've gone too far with this. Alex, sensing backup, folded his arms and stayed quiet, letting Mom fight his battle. He even smirked slightly, like this was going exactly according to plan, except for Dad's unexpected betrayal. I didn't respond. There was no point. They'd already decided I was the problem because I'd stopped playing the role they expected. I pushed my plate forward, stood up, and told them I wasn't explaining myself again. The silence as I walked to the door was heavy enough to feel, but I didn't look back. I thought that would be the end of their family intervention, but I underestimated their creativity. 3 days later, Alex and Mom teamed up for something I never saw coming, a stunt designed to corner me into helping him again. That's when things stopped being merely tense and started feeling like warfare. I was returning from a morning meeting with a potential investor when I spotted the large white moving truck parked directly in front of my apartment building. At first, I assumed one of my neighbors was finally following through on their threats to move to Florida. But as I got closer, my stomach dropped. Alex was standing at the truck's rear, directing 2 movers like he owned the place. His wife stood on the sidewalk holding a box labeled kitchen, wearing that tight smile people put on when they're trying to act casual about something deeply calculated. I approached slowly. Alex spotted me and broke into a grin like this was some kind of surprise party. "Perfect timing," he said, clapping his hands together. "We're just about to start unloading." "Unloading where?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect. He tilted his head toward my building. "Your second bedroom's been empty since you moved in. We figured we'd crash here for a couple weeks. Just until we get settled." "No." I didn't raise my voice. I just said it once, clearly and definitively. Alex laughed like I was playing along and turned toward the movers. "Start bringing things inside." I stepped in front of the building entrance. "No. You're not moving in here." His wife shifted the box in her arms and tried to intervene, explaining how their condo's landlord had decided not to renew their lease, how everything had happened so fast they didn't have time to find a new place. "This is just temporary," she said. "We're family." That's when I noticed something over her shoulder. Mom's car parked halfway down the block. She was leaning against the driver's side door, arms crossed, sunglasses on, watching like a general overseeing a battle she'd already decided she was going to win. So this wasn't desperation. This was strategy. "This isn't happening," I told Alex. He tried the guilt angle. I was being cruel. They had nowhere else to go. His kid didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of our dispute. I pointed out there were plenty of other relatives they could call, and if there weren't, maybe that said something about how they treated people. That's when Mom strolled up, slow and deliberate. She didn't yell, but her voice could have cut glass. "You're turning your back on your own blood," she said. "If you let them walk away today, you'll regret it more than you can imagine." I told her the only regret I had was letting things get this far in the first place. Then I turned to the movers. "If you unload anything into this building, it's going right back in the truck at his expense." The movers looked at each other uncertainly. One asked Alex quietly if they should just head back to the storage unit. Alex swore under his breath. His wife stared at her shoes. After a long, tense pause, Alex waved the movers off. They packed everything back into the truck without another word. Mom didn't say anything as she walked back to her car, but the look she gave me made it clear this was far from over. That night at exactly 11:04 p.m., I got a text from Alex. "You're going to regret this more than you think." I didn't reply. 2 days later, I discovered what he meant. And it wasn't about money, it was personal. Very personal. I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. At first, I thought it might be work, a client crisis or supplier issue. But when I saw the flood of notifications, my stomach tightened. It wasn't emails. It wasn't business. It was social media. I had dozens of missed calls, mountains of direct messages, and over 100 tag notifications. People I hadn't spoken to in years were sending me screenshots. Alex had gone public. On Facebook, he'd crafted a post that read like something from a soap opera, a heartbreaking tale of how his own younger brother had kicked him, his wife, and his child out onto the streets when they had nowhere else to go. He painted me as the cold, calculating businessman who'd forgotten his roots the moment he had money in his pocket. Every fact that made him look bad was conveniently omitted. No mention of the startup I'd been funding, no reference to the year plus I'd been paying their mortgage, nothing about the moving truck stunt. And of course, he completely left out the part where he'd humiliated me at my own graduation party. By the time I saw it, The post had been shared almost 60 times, with comment threads full of armchair moralists. Some were neutral, people who clearly sensed something was off about the story. Others were family friends, old neighbors, and distant relatives I barely remembered, leaving observations like, "Family is forever," and "Blood should come before business." But what really stung were comments from people I'd gone to school with, people who knew nothing about my current life but clearly loved the drama. Things like, "Guess money changes people," and "Wow, I didn't think you were like this." By noon, Mom had left me 3 increasingly angry voicemails. She didn't ask if any of the story was true. She didn't want details or context. All she cared about was that this was making the family look bad and that I needed to just make it right. That's when I decided I wasn't going to let Alex control the narrative. The next morning, I texted him, "Meet me at the condo. Noon." When I arrived, I let myself in with the spare key I still had. I was already sitting at the kitchen table when he walked in, looking smug like he expected me to apologize. In front of me was a neat stack of papers, bank statements, loan documents, transfer records showing every payment I'd made toward his mortgage, every deposit into the startup, every expense I'd covered over the past year and a half. I didn't yell. I didn't make speeches. I simply slid the stack across the table. "If you don't take down that post by the end of today and post a correction," I said calmly, "I'll send copies of these documents to every single person who shared your story. Family, friends, potential investors, everyone." At first, he smirked, claiming I'd never actually do it. Then I pulled out my phone and showed him the draft message I'd already prepared, complete with screenshots and a detailed timeline. His expression changed instantly. The smugness vanished, replaced by the dawning realization that his narrative was about to collapse under the weight of documented reality. That night, the post disappeared from Facebook without a trace. No apology, no follow-up explanation, just gone like it had never existed. I thought maybe that would finally be the end of it, that we'd reached the point where he'd back off and leave me alone. I was wrong, because the following week I made a move he never saw coming, one that wouldn't just close this chapter, but lock the door behind it permanently. A week passed without a single word from Alex. No calls, no texts, not even passive-aggressive social media posts. The silence felt unnatural, like the calm before a hurricane. I knew him well enough to realize he was either sulking or quietly plotting his next move. But I'd already decided what my next move would be. That Friday morning, I sat in a downtown lawyer's office and signed the final paperwork to invest in my friend Chris's startup. Chris was someone I'd known since sophomore year of college, not flashy, didn't make grand promises, didn't play victim when things got difficult. For 2 years, he'd been building a tech platform on his own dime, working nights at a warehouse just to keep it funded. Every conversation with Chris focused on the work itself, not the attention or the shortcuts, or the dramatic narratives. Months earlier, he'd asked if I'd consider coming in as a partner. Back then, I'd told him my money was tied up with Alex's project. Now my resources were free, and I wanted to put them where they might actually build something real. When the ink dried on that contract, I felt a calm I hadn't experienced in months. That afternoon, I called Dad and asked if he wanted to meet for coffee. We sat by the window of a small cafe, and I slid the signed investment agreement across to him. He read it carefully, then set it down with a satisfied nod. "Good," he said. "At least it's going to someone who's earned it." By evening, the news had reached Mom. I didn't have to wonder how. Alex must have called her the second he found out. She left me 2 voicemails saying essentially the same thing. I was humiliating my brother by choosing to back someone else instead of helping him rebuild. She said I was being spiteful, trying to make him look bad to the whole family. An hour later, Alex texted, "Wow, guess you really are done." I didn't reply. 2 days later, I drove to the condo one final time. I wanted this conversation to be face-to-face so there would be no room for him to twist my words later. When I walked in, Alex was on the couch scrolling through his phone while his wife sat at the dining table paying bills. He didn't even look up initially. I stood there until he did. "I'm going to make this simple," I said. "From this point on, your life is in your hands. No more loans, no more bills covered, no shared accounts. Whatever happens from here, you handle it yourself. I'm done." For a moment, he just stared like he was trying to figure out if I was bluffing. His wife glanced between us but didn't say a word. Finally, Alex laughed, not because he thought it was funny, but because he didn't know what else to do. You'll regret this, he said quietly. I didn't answer. I walked out the door, down the hall, and didn't look back. That night, sitting in my apartment looking at the contract with Chris's name on it, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. Blood isn't enough. You can be related to someone without actually being family. And once you see that clearly, there's no going back. We were family, but not really family. And for the first time, I was completely fine with that. The update. Almost a month had passed since I walked out of Alex's condo and told him I was done. The weeks that followed felt different, like I'd finally eliminated a constant noise I didn't even realize had been there. No sudden phone calls asking for just a little help. No passive-aggressive messages. No guilt trips from Mom every other day. Chris's startup was moving faster than either of us had expected. We just completed a successful beta test, and the feedback was strong enough that we had a meeting lined up with a major investor. For the first time in a long time, every dollar and hour I invested felt like it actually mattered. Then on a Tuesday morning, a text appeared from an unknown number. Check your mailbox. You'll want to see this. L. I didn't recognize the number or the initial, but something made me go downstairs immediately. Sure enough, there was a thick, unmarked envelope wedged into my mail slot. Inside were printed screenshots of email threads between Alex and two of my former business contacts. The more I read, the more my anger crystallized into something colder and more focused. Alex had been trying to pitch my old investors on a relaunch of the project we'd once worked on together. Except in his version, it was entirely his creation. He'd stripped my name from every detail, claiming he'd personally designed and funded the early prototypes, the same ones I'd paid for and developed through my own contacts. Worse, he'd attached those original designs. My designs. My intellectual property. I had no idea who L was, but based on how these emails had landed in my hands, I suspected it was someone in Alex's own circle. Maybe someone who'd finally gotten tired of watching him take shortcuts and burn bridges. I didn't waste time. That afternoon, I forwarded the screenshots to my lawyer and made 2 very specific phone calls to the investors Alex had contacted. I laid out the real history of the project, explained who had actually funded what, and clarified that the attached prototypes were my intellectual property. By the end of the week, Alex's pitch was dead. Both investors cut contact with him completely. I expected him to call me in a rage, but he didn't. Instead, Mom called, her voice sharp from the opening word. She accused me of ruining his future, of kicking him when he was down. She didn't ask if the story was true. She didn't want details or context. All she cared about was that I'd prevented him from getting another lifeline. I told her this was exactly what happened when you burned every bridge you had and then tried to steal materials from someone else's construction site to rebuild. The following Monday, Chris and I closed our first round of funding. Several investors who had once considered Alex's project were now putting their money into something built on actual work rather than borrowed credibility. That night, I poured myself a drink and sat in my apartment, finally understanding something fundamental. Alex hadn't changed, and he never would. The only difference now was that he had no way to get close enough to pull me back into his chaos. And I wasn't planning to give him one. The success of Chris's venture, the clean separation from Alex's drama, the support from Dad, even the mysterious intervention from L, it all pointed to the same conclusion. When you finally stop enabling destructive behavior and start investing in people who actually deserve your trust, the universe has a way of supporting that decision.